to talk about is frequency tables. Frequency tables are used to organize data that you've collected. So say you're part of an organization that needs to know what are the students at Leon High School's favorite lunch. What does the cafeteria serve, right? So somebody from that organization stands in the lunchroom and all the kids that eat lunch, they have them fill out a survey, and at the end of the day they have all this data to collect. Diane, what's your favorite lunch to serve? Cheese Sissy. So what's your favorite lunch that you wish that the cafeteria served? Jeremiah? Let's say chicken nuggets. So whatever. So there could be, we know not everybody eats in the cafeteria, but there could be 1,000 responses to that question, right? And some of them are going to be the same, right? So if you collect all that data, you have to have a way to organize it. And then once you have it organized, you want to have a way to present it with a visual representation. And that would be a graph of some sort, a pie chart, a bar chart. We're going to talk about histogram today, which was very much like a pie chart. Could be a graph on a coordinate plane where you can see a line or a curve or a scatter plot, something like that, right? So we collect data, we organize it into what we call a frequency table, and then we create a graph or some sort of visual presentation of that data. So you can kind of see at a glance maybe what the least favorite is, maybe what the most favorite is. Does that make sense? So the first thing we're going to talk about are the frequency tables. So you collect the data, organize it in a frequency table, and then you use that data once it's organized. So frequency tables are used to create many types of graphs. Do you guys know what the frequency of something is? How many times it occurs. That's exactly right. So the frequency of something is how many times it occurs. We use the word frequent a lot. Frequent means it happens a lot, but frequency means we need to know how many times it happens, right? So if you want the frequency of something, how often does it happen? You could say often if we say frequent, but if you wanted the frequency, we need to know how often or how many times they happen. The frequency table displays a set of data by grouping into frequency intervals and showing the frequency in each interval. I know it's not super big, but I'm having a hard time with getting it to stay on the screen if I enlarge it. So that word is interval, interval. The important thing to note when you are, and you kind of get to pick the intervals, you do get to pick the intervals when you organize on a frequency table. The important thing to make sure is that there's the same number of possible data values in each interval, and there are no gaps in those intervals. So if one interval ends at 9, the next one needs to start at 10, okay? And that's if you're not using decimals. So there's some steps to create a frequency table from a set of data. So we're going to go through those steps. Your frequency table on the back of your worksheet is wrong. I managed to mess it up on my own. It is a little bit tedious when I made the notes the other day. To create a frequency table from a set of data, and we'll correct it. We're going to do this one together on the front. The one that we do on the front down here in the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to do, or the bottom of the page, we're going to make a frequency table, and then we'll copy those values over to our other table. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to create a 3-column table. So this is what that 3-column table is going to look like. And I would like for you to just go ahead and go down to the bottom and go ahead and create your 3-column table. Made mine a little fancy because I put 2 lines up here because we're going to have titles of all 3 columns. So we're going to put our column titles here. That's the first step. Now do some of these steps in a little different order. I had create the intervals here, but that's actually, we're going to pop down. The intervals are the hardest part, so let's do those last. Let's do the easy parts first. So we're going to go down and we're going to label the left column. Oh, wait a minute, did we title it? Oh, that's the thing we forgot up here. So create the 3-column table and title it. So our example that we're working on down here is marathon time. So that's all you have to put. It's not a fancy title, just something to identify what your data collection is about. So all the columns need a title. So the left column is always going to be the title of your interval. So these marathon times, these are minutes times in minutes, so that's going to be the title of our interval. So we're going to pick these ranges of values to separate our data into. The middle column is always going to have the word tally at the top. You guys know how to use tally marks? The little sticks. So we're going to use the tally marks to organize our data. The tally goes in the middle. The right column is going to be titled with the word frequency. Once again, the hardest part, and it's not hard, but it is tedious, can be easily messed up. I messed it up when I was trying to shorten the notes yesterday or the day before whenever I did it. I didn't realize it until we got in class today in first period. So these are our times. So in our data collection, the data we're talking about are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. So there are 12 data values there. You don't really have to have that, but it is nice when you do your tally marks, make sure you have 12 tally marks because we should have the same number of tally marks as you have data values. Does that make sense? Okay. So we need to decide how we're going to separate these 12 data values in our frequency table. We don't want to have a group for each data value, right? We don't want to have an interval for each data value. The whole idea is to organize these data, these times in a way that we can kind of see what is the range of times that most people ran it in. So if all these times represented separate people running the marathon, what was the highest frequency range, right? For these intervals in the frequency table, it's subjective. So there is no right or wrong answer to the number of intervals to use. You don't want to have too many. You don't want to have too few. Too many, you don't really get to see a trend. Too few, you can't really identify a trend. This is intro to frequency tables. I don't expect you to be an expert. So we're always going to use 4 intervals. If you get to a point and your 4 intervals didn't work out great and you need to add another one, that's okay. You can use. We're going to use a minimum of 4 intervals and we'll say no more than 5. All right, so how do we find the intervals? We're going to go back up here. First thing we're going to do is find the range of your data values. Anybody remember? So the range of the set of numbers is the biggest number minus the smallest number, right? So our biggest number in that range minus our smallest number in that range. So the biggest, what's the biggest data value? And what's the smallest? 135. So we're going to first find our range. So in that box below here, we're going to write 246 minus 135. Now we said, we're going to use 4 intervals, or 4 groups, or 4 ranges. So we're going to divide that range by 4. So in each of my intervals, if I divided by 4, I'd have 27.75 in each interval. I don't need it to be that tedious. So we're just going to round it up. So here it says add what you need to create equal intervals. And also add what you need to create non-messy intervals. Okay? So we are going to just have 28 numbers in each interval. You don't necessarily have to start with the smallest data value, and you don't necessarily have to end with the largest data value. But your intervals have to include the smallest and the largest. There shouldn't be a bunch of numbers below the smallest. There shouldn't be a bunch of numbers above the largest. But like I said, there is no exact right or wrong answer. So once we know that there are 28 numbers in each interval, now we're going to go over here and we're going to create our intervals. So we're going to go ahead and fill in the blank. We're going to divide into equal groups. And I forgot to uncover that we're going to always use 4 groups. We'll say 4 to 5 groups, just so you know. Okay, so here comes the tricky part. We want 28 numbers in each interval, right? Let me ask you this. Look at this interval right here, 5 to 10. How many numbers are in that range from 5 to 10? That is what you counterintuitive. That's what you think. But let's look. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers. We're just talking about numbers. We're not talking about the difference. And that's where everybody gets confused, right? So here it's really 5 plus 5, but that would be 6 numbers. Does that make sense? So here we're going to start with our smallest number, 135. But 135 is the first number, right? So we're going to add 27 to that to get our 28th number. So if we have 135 and we add 27 to that, I think it's 162, right? Yeah, 162. So in this range, there are 28 possible values, okay? So now up here it says, when we talked about those frequency, the intervals, there can be no gaps. So that means if we end at 162 here and we're not working with decimals, then we start at 163 here. Does that make sense? So now we need to add 27 to that number, because 163 is our first number. Does that make sense? All right? Does that make sense, Tracia? Pretty simply, so if I add 27 to this, I get 190. What's going to be the next number in the first number in my next interval? 191. And if I add 27 to that, what do I get? 218. So right now I'm up to 218. My biggest number is 246. It's definitely not enough intervals, right? And we said we wanted 4. That's what we split it into. So what's my last interval going to start with? 219. We're going to add 27 to that, and it happens that that's going to be our biggest number. It might have been a couple more. Yes. Oh, I should have started with 192. Thank you. So that's the tedious part of it. 192 plus 27, 219. That's probably 190 there. Okay, my bad. There we go. Now that would be still the 218, right? And this would be 219 to 246. So, a little bit messy. 218, 246. literally the hardest part of the frequency, okay? Another way to do it, we could have just added 28 here and I guess done one before. There's a couple different ways to do it, but the way we did it, you can see, you have to understand how many numbers are in an interval, so I like that way, even though I did make it look a little bit harder. I can't seem to write the numbers that come out of our mouth sometimes. All right, so we're going to use these data values, and we're going to go through and just put tally marks wherever each of these data values falls in the range. And the best practice is to go ahead and scratch them out when you do that. So we're going to place 135 tally. 135 falls between 135 and 162. 211 tally is going to go in this interval, because 211 falls between 191 and 218. And we're going to continue to do that until we have all of our values tallied in our frequency table. I always double check it, so that's 5, 7, 10, 12, that is 12 numbers. 135 would be 1. And 208, yeah, that blue mark shouldn't be there. So there's only 4 here. So there's 2 here, that's what the frequency means. 3 here, 4 here, and 3 here. If I add those up, that does equal my 12 data values. Okay? So now that's how you make the frequency table. They collected the data, determined the range subjectively, right? But we're going to use 4. If your numbers look wonky at the end, you need one other interval for your biggest number, that's fine. But we're going to default to 4. So that's how you make a frequency table. Now we use the frequency table to make a graph. And so we're going to talk about now how do you use this frequency table to make a histogram. So right now, flip your worksheet over and let's correct the frequency table that's over there because I messed that up. Oh. Use the data fill in the columns, my bad. So you use the data to tally and then write the numerical number of tally marks. Once you're through filling that in, flip it over and correct that frequency table that I messed up. Yes. Yes. No, remember I messed that one up. The first time I did it in blue. Yeah, it's not supposed to be there. Yeah. The blue one is wrong, the red ones are right. So there's 4 red ones. Good question. But I had to double check it. See, I have blue marks there. I messed it up with my blue. So I went back and corrected it with the red. Does that make sense? So it should be 2 tally marks, 3 tally marks, 4 tally marks, 3 tally marks. Write the numerical value of the tally marks and then just double check that you have the right number of data values. And we're correcting our data, our chart in the back. need to correct the ranges. The ranges are not right, the intervals aren't right. So just strike them and write the correct one through it. So the first range would be 135 to 162. So I would not, yeah. I would just write it to the left of it, but it's up to you. So you're going to correct this, stretch that, and write 135 to 162. And then 163 to 1, scratch the second interval, write 163 to 190. Scratch the fourth, write 191 to 218. Somehow there we go. That's not 28, but 218. And the last interval should be 219 to 246. Does that make sense? Get it corrected? Okay. So we're going to get through these notes, but we probably won't do the histogram. That's where I ended it for period. Tomorrow in class, we'll do the 12-2 even together, which is just a frequency table and a histogram. And then we'll do the rest of our notes. We'll do some 12-2 part 2 notes. All right, so we're going to the back. We're going to use this frequency table to create a histogram. So a histogram is a visual display using bars to show the frequency of values. I don't know why I messed up like that. Frequency of values within specified intervals. So the last blank is intervals. Intervals. That's what I just underlined. So mine is a little off to the side. I guess I'm going to have to try to switch it over. I actually literally already did this, but whatever. Let's do it again. Okay. So a histogram and a bar chart are not the same thing, but the only difference is they are used for analyzing different kinds of data usually, but the biggest thing for us to note is that the bars don't touch. So the difference in a histogram and a bar chart, so I'm going to pop over here. This is a histogram. The bars are touching. In a bar chart, there's always a gap in between the bars. All right, so ours can't have gaps in between them. So the bars must touch. The bars touch in a histogram, they don't touch in a bar chart. So you will lose points if your bars don't touch. So to create a histogram, the first thing we're going to do is create a frequency table. But we already have a frequency table, so we're going to use that one. We may have time to do our histogram here. Maybe not. So we pulled the frequency table from the first example, a marathon time. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to draw and label the axes of the histogram. And I'm going to pull up and let you guys do that at the bottom. So draw and label the axes. The axes, you're just creating a right angle, right? The axes, frequency, and the title of your intervals. So you're going to create a right angle, 2 lines. It looks like the quadrant 1 in the coordinate plane, basically. The side title or label is always going to be frequency. and the bottom label is going to be whatever the title of your intervals are, okay? You do have to actually have a title on your bar chart as well, or your histogram as well. Okay. So we did that already. We labeled the intervals on the bottom and the frequency on the side. We actually are going to go in and put, part of labeling the axes is putting in, our frequency is from 2 to 4, so I'm putting in from 1 to 4. So our highest bar is going to be at 4. So it's always good to start at, if this is a smaller range, is that to start at 1. And here we take our intervals from our interval column and label each group. So we need 4 sections here, 4 equal sections here. So I just kind of marked them off there. Does that make sense, Keishan? Can you see, buddy? Do you need to go move up? You can sit in this seat right here if you want, or the one right in front of Zion. The one right in front of Zion's got a little bit of a, not as comfortable because it's pretty close to the board. All right. I'm going to bring it back down in just a second, Keishan. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to title, we already did that, so we're going to title the histogram. We really should have done that up there probably, but whatever. And then we're going to use the frequency table to shade in. So we're going to use the frequency rather here from the frequency column to shade in each interval to the appropriate height bar. So the only thing you're filling in there is frequency. So your histogram should have a title, the axes should have a title, there should be numbers marking off the intervals for your frequency and the intervals for your actual intervals that we created. So now, to draw the bar to appropriate height, this first interval has a frequency of 2, so we're going to go up to 2 and create our bar. And then shade them. The next frequency is 3, so we're going to go up to 3 here. And create another bar. And then shade it in. The next frequency is 4. I'm going to go up to 4. Create another bar. Remember, they have to be touching. Mine's not straight. Oh, my God. And the last one, the frequency is 3. So our bar has to be 3 high. And that is our histogram that represents our frequency table, the data collected in the frequency table titled Marathon Time. We finished our notes that we needed for 12-2 even, but since first period did not, I'm going to keep you on the same schedule with them. Plus, I like the idea of you guys having to go ahead and complete the AR 1.1 EOC review. So we started it, worked on it multiple days. They started at 21 problems, so hopefully you're down to maybe not half, but just a little bit more than half of those problems, and you can finish those tonight on Alex. Any questions on the notes? Any questions on what you're doing for homework tonight? Those notes are posted on Canvas.